How's it going, Star Seekers? Welcome back to Star or Shovelware. My name's Got Cake, and in today's review we're going to be taking a look at Manifold Garden, a first-person puzzle game where you make your way through a world full of architecture that repeats infinitely, and have to manipulate gravity to solve puzzles in order to cleanse the corruption that plagues the world and restore life to it. Now, if that description sounds a bit strange, it's because I was struggling to find the words to describe the game. To simplify things, I'll just say at its core, Manifold Garden is essentially 40% puzzle game, 60% art. Now, there's no storyline in Manifold Garden, and the game begins by teaching us key gameplay mechanics and rules that the world in which we find ourselves operates. First, we learn that we can shift gravity by approaching a surface and hitting ZR, and this is the single most important mechanic you'll have to master as you work your way through the game. This first section of the game also introduces us to how our orientation affects objects in the world. Switches, for example, can't be activated unless we're orientated so that the arrow on them is pointing downwards, matching our gravity. Now, puzzle mechanics in the game are introduced one by one, and the first of these that we encounter are cube puzzles. The first and most simple type of puzzle featuring cubes are ones where we have to activate coloured squares to open doors. We're able to pick up and move cubes to place them on these squares, but as with switches we can only do this when we're correctly orientated. When gravity is shifted so it doesn't align with the arrows on the cube, then the cube will be frozen in place, and this feature is something that is utilised in solving some of the game's puzzles. Now, sometimes we find single cubes in rooms, but other times we find trees from which multiple cubes can be plucked. However, we can only have one instance of each cube, and picking it again will remove its existing instance. So after making our way through the first tutorial section, we find ourselves in our first large area, which I'll just refer to as a manifold. These manifold areas contain architectural structures which appear to repeat infinitely in all directions. Now, falling from a surface eventually brings you back out above it, and we can use this to reach our next area, and throughout the game this mechanic is used extensively in both puzzles and when transitioning between locations. Whilst I personally didn't experience any issues with the whole gravity shifting and repeating structures, it wouldn't surprise me if it causes some players a little motion sickness. Now, I will mention that many manifold areas are quite large, and sometimes the complexity can become disorientating, especially when faced with a repeating architecture. And although the game is linear in design, it doesn't hold your hand or direct you in any obvious way. Sometimes I found myself at a loss as to where I needed to go next, and working this out often ended up being a puzzle in itself. Now, whilst the visuals and scale of these areas is often awe-inspiring, it also means that there's a lot of walking between puzzle areas which could potentially put less patient gamers off. There is a run button which makes moving between locations a little faster, but being the idiot that I am, I only actually discovered this about 10 minutes from the end of the game, which just goes to show that you should always take note of the game's controls before you actually dive into it. Now, in addition to the box puzzles, there are also several other puzzle mechanics we encounter as we progress through each manifold. There are puzzles featuring water which flows across surfaces and falls repeatedly through manifolds, and we have to use cubes to direct the flow of water to grow cube trees and activate water wheels to open doors. One thing that I found pretty neat was that gravity shifting also causes water to freeze and become a solid surface that we can walk across. There are also puzzles featuring these coloured shifters, which when we place a cube into them changes both the colour and direction in which gravity affects cubes. So whilst there isn't the same amount of puzzle variety in Manifold Garden as there is found in other puzzle games such as The Witness, I thought the developers did a great job and were very creative with the way in which they incorporated each of the game's puzzle mechanics into the whole manifold theme and with the gravity shifting mechanics. There are a few additional puzzle dynamics, such as this one where you've got to shift gravity to guide a ball through this tunnel, but it's only found in one manifold, and I would have liked to have seen it used more throughout the game. Now, I will say that I didn't find puzzles in Manifold Garden particularly challenging. There were a few trickier ones, but in general I solved most of them with very little issue. This is great for those who usually struggle with puzzle games as it makes the game more accessible, but puzzle veterans might not find the experience as fulfilling as they might have liked. I also felt towards the latter part of the game that the puzzle elements seemed to run out of steam a little. Now, I'm not saying that they vanished entirely, I just thought they sort of took a backseat in favour of the game's visuals. I will admit that Manifold Garden is visually stunning from start to finish. However, those looking for a game which features a very heavy focus on solving puzzles may be a little disappointed by what Manifold Garden has to offer. I did say by my estimation that the game was around 40% puzzle, 60% art, which I think is pretty accurate, but there'll no doubt be those who disagree with this. So the objective in Manifold Garden is to cleanse manifolds of this dark substance which seems to be growing in them in order to bring life back to them. And to do this we first need to activate these lasers in each area by solving its puzzles. Doing this unlocks this dark cube which we then return to its rightful place to restore balance to the area, which then unlocks access to the next manifold. There are a total of 6 manifolds and one final section of the game, and completing the whole game will likely take you between 4 and 6 hours depending on how fast you solve the puzzles. Now, I thought the whole manifold theme was put to great effect, and I thought the developers did a fantastic job to make each area of the game visually unique. It certainly gives the game a very unique visual aesthetic, helping it to stand out amongst other games in the genre. The frame rate holds up surprisingly well on the Switch considering the visual complexity of the game areas. However, I did encounter a couple of frame rate drops. The game also contains a photo mode which allows you to manipulate the camera to produce some very interesting patterns, which would look great as a desktop background or a YouTube thumbnail. Now, I haven't really wanted to get too in depth with this review to avoid spoilers, but hopefully I've covered enough to help you decide whether the game is for you or not. I personally had a great time playing through Manifold Garden, bar a couple of frustrating times where I got a little lost, but I would definitely rate it up there with some of the best puzzle games I've played. I'll finally end by saying that I also love the game's beautiful ambient electronic soundtrack, and I hope that there's an OST release to the game which I'll definitely also pick up. So now we come to rating the game. Now, I rate games between 1 and 5 stars, with a shovelware stamp of approval reserved for the worst games on the eShop. This rating is based on my own personal opinion on what a game has to offer in terms of gameplay and value for money to potential buyers. And for a rating, I'd give Manifold Garden 3 out of 5 stars. Manifold Garden is undoubtedly one of the most unique puzzle games I've played this year alongside Superliminal, both in terms of its visuals and puzzle dynamics, and I'd highly recommend it to anyone looking for a more relaxing puzzle experience, and I really hope that the devs release a sequel in the coming years. You can get the game from the UK Switch eShop currently with 10% off for £14.57 or from the US eShop for $17.99. Alternatively, the game's also available on Xbox One, PlayStation 4 and Steam. How's it going, Star Seekers? I hope you enjoyed this review of Manifold Garden, and if you did, hit that like button and let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Don't forget to subscribe for future Switch content and reviews, and jump onto the Star Seekers Discord to join its growing community. For now though, I just want to say thanks once again for watching, and until next time, game on.